stuff, and then we can go around and talking about stuff. Okay.
Okay, it's recording.
Okay. Hi everybody. Welcome to the SIG architecture call. Today is October 10th. This is just a reminder. We are recording this call, so please be good to each other. We do have a light agenda today, and I was hoping that we could get ourselves organized a little bit around with the recent churn in the folks working on SIG architecture. So I wanted to open up this doc. I don't know if anybody had a chance to go through this doc and add their names. What I'll do is let me paste this to the channel as well. So you, how do I do that? Where do I do it from? Okay, I'll do that in a minute when we start talking. So first, I wanted to request John and Derek to, what do you think about this idea of trying to come up with more things for people to do and things to poke at?
I mean, I think it would be great if I think this is a great idea, and we need more people involved. And so if we can, I guess this is a lot of different sections. Some of these are sub-projects, and probably some of it needs to, I don't know. There needs to be a lead on any one of these things is mainly my point. Otherwise, it's everybody will expect everybody else to do it. So if we're gonna organize this way, I just think we need to make sure that there's a point person for each of these.
I agree. Derek?
Yeah, I don't have any major objections to this. I mean, I like getting help where help is needed, and the structure you have here is useful. The one ask I have as we start to fan this out is like that we find the appropriate meeting cadence for these various pieces so that people can actually meet and also do other activities. I think a lot of us have a ton of overlapping items. So I don't know for some of these items if you were assuming different meeting cadences or more ad hoc interaction.
Okay, yeah, let me say what I was thinking when I was doing this, right? So first of all, we have the 4 sub-projects. They already have leads, and they have their current cadence. All of them have, Google Docs, and they have project boards and whatnot. And the API reviews have bots. So these 4, I'm not really worried about right now. This was more about making sure that if there are new people coming in, they know that these are the 4 sub-projects that they need to go to. So Jared, who else? Ken. So please make sure that you talk to the leads of those other sub-projects that you're interested in. The rest of the people that I see the names, you know how to navigate the Kubernetes community. So I'm not worried about Quinton or Jorge or Tim for that matter. So these 4 things, right? The 4 things on top. The way I was thinking about it was, we know we've traditionally had problems with the technical debt, and there's like nobody paying attention to it. Then kept curation. We still don't have a cadence. Some of this work was in SIG PM before, but then what do we do on the architecture side was the idea here. Then the topics we constantly had, we've canceled meetings several times in the last few months, just because we don't have timely meetings topics that are raised that we could then go around finding people to that might be affected by specific topics and need input on specific topics. Then triage, we've tried to do this before in a separate call and try to bring stuff before the meeting and add it to the agenda. So these four, I don't see these four as sub-projects per se right now, because we have to bootstrap them. And the idea here would be to get the people looking at these four groups to propose things that we could talk about in the regular SIG architecture. For example, these three could meet outside of the main SIG architecture call and propose items to. And the same goes with these four people. If they need our help in terms of self-organize, if self-organization doesn't work, then we can put some structure into it, saying, okay, these are the leads, kind of thing.
I'm sorry so I'm just trying to map the way things have been working and then what you're proposing here. So the issue NPR triage, I view that as just a general helping framework that we've tried to apply to other SIGs. So that seems to make perfect sense. Mm-hmm. The meeting topics curation, we had previously had a meeting to discuss what to do in the meeting, and then we started transitioning to just handling that over Slack. I assume you're saying that's the same thing. The KEP curation and highlights, what in particular are you focusing that as being? Is that KEP specific to SIG Arch, or is that KEPs across the project?
I would leave it up to the set of people to bring whatever they think would be of value across. So the way I was thinking about it was, if it is specific to one SIG, then we might not have to look at it. If it's crossing SIGs, then we might have to, help move the KEP around. Sorry, John, you were saying something.
I find a lot of value. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I find a lot of value in reading KEPs, even if they're in SIGs that I don't generally pay attention to. And I think that the brain trust that tends to come to this call would serve the community well by reading more KEPs. And so I signed up for that one, I think, right? In the hopes that we could establish something relatively simple like a KEP reading group, where we would sit down, read through the KEPs of the week or of the month or whatever the meeting cadence is, talk about them, see which ones were particularly interesting that we wanted to look at as a larger SIG Arch group. I would personally find that valuable, and I think having a group would be a forcing function to do some of that. Not that I want another meeting, but I need a good excuse to put time aside and read KEPs.
You could publicly shame the rest of us. I like it.
I was hoping that I could get 4 or 5 of you to do the same, and we could shard the workout and summarize the KEPs and actually make it not particularly painful and interesting.
I think Tim Sinclair has raised his hand, so we give him a chance to talk now.
So I agree with Tim's supposition. I think you can make this a standing item as part of this meeting, where they just, a subsection or a small working group just reports out updates. I don't think we need a major formalism here, other than for most of those sub-elements up above. But I think someone who helps to curate the meeting and helps to drive the agenda in a format so it's consistent. Where as Tim mentioned, maybe every week we could have a highlighted KEP that we could review as part of this standing call. Because I know we've punted a bunch of these meetings, but to be honest, I think we probably did that a little prematurely. I think there's probably a ton of content we could cover as a group if we had a well-structured agenda.
So I think that's a good point. I don't know that we want to add topics just for the sake of having a meeting, but I do definitely think the strategy thus far has been, if you want to talk about something in the meeting, raising the mailing list so that it's more widely distributed, and those people who are interested in it can show up to the meeting for live discussion. I think probably we haven't done a readout from the different sub-projects for a while. I think it's reasonable that there is some small standing agenda of readouts from the sub-projects and maybe like a highlighted cap like this. But I don't think we want to, necessarily go in search of topics just to fill time. Let's try and keep it focused.
I agree. In an ideal world, this KEP scanning group would find nothing worth mentioning to the larger group, and we'd have no need for an agenda. I don't suspect that to be true very often.
Yeah.
So then the next question is, who wants to run this? I need 2 names.
Do you want to try a smaller scale first, Tim? Like maybe you see if you can actually, you personally can get traction with 2 other people to convince them to do this. Like, I think you have a good idea, and I know myself, and the idea of social peer pressure to get me to actually sit down and read, it may actually work.
Okay, so I will be happy to try to coordinate finding a time and a cadence. If I can get, how many people are on the call today? I don't know. If I can get 3 other people who will
21.
commit to it attending.
I would.
David, I'm volunteering you.
I am also very.
Work out a date, and we will. We'll do that.
Okay.
Time
I've
over.
got David, I've got John. I need 1 more.
Tim, for what it's worth, in a previous life, I did a very similar exercise, and it was highly effective, I must say. So
I'm sure we've done RFP reading groups and
yeah,
academic literature reading groups. I think they're very interesting. I think the peer pressure is an important component of it.
Okay, who else do you
Derek
want
Carr's
must
raised his
attend?
hand.
So I am, anytime David is signed up to do something painful, I feel compelled to join him.
He just wants to be a babysitter.
Just he also has like a yeah, I think I'll take it from your office, David. But the question I have is, like, there's the idea here is not to act as a gatekeeper to KEPs, but more to advertise that which is happening around the community. I worry that by structuring this, some might view this as a gatekeeping role.
Yeah, no, I do. It's a great point. I do not want to make this a gatekeeping role unless we detect that there are actually systemic problems that we're not handling otherwise. I would say initially this is the senior people on the project looking at what's going on in the project and making each other aware of the interesting parts.
Right.
There have been many KEPs that have merged, say in SIG Node, where I found them later and went, oh, that's interesting. I wish I had seen that before.
Right.
And they're all great, Tim, right?
Okay.
I agree. I think this is fine.
Can I request you all to make sure you use the SIG Architecture Slack channel and the mailing list that we have already?
Yep,
And
I will.
I
I will seed a conversation maybe today, maybe tomorrow, and see if we can find a time to get together. I don't want to make it a 20-person group because we'll never find a time that works.
I might.
And if it's big enough, we will not feel shame.
That's true.
I think to echo Derek's concern or question is that maybe having a well-defined charter might help to sort of alleviate, because like one of the things I would ask for this group is the problem that we have in the conformance subproject is enforcement, right? We have a lot of KEPs, but we don't necessarily have enforcement for policies that we have around some of these proposals. So,
okay, the 3 of you go ahead, do what you need to do, and come back to us, right?
You got it.
Okay, so can I go back and talk about this, the first 2? So Jared and Ken, are you on? No. Okay, I'll follow up with them on Slack. Maybe I'll help bootstrap them, and I'll find. Okay. So so these 3, right? So earlier, like John said, we do this on Slack. We do it on like a Tuesday before the meeting. So what we should do here is the current 3 chairs plus these 3 people will basically, we'll ping each other and see what needs to be talked about. So that is the way I was thinking about it. This would be like a short conversation on Slack, and or followed by an email to the Google group. So we have things on the agenda for the coming Thursday. Does that work well?
I think that works, but I think we also probably should have a readout from the sub projects, and whether that's once every other meeting or that's every meeting.
We have 4 sub-projects and we meet twice a month here, right? So let's do 2 sub-projects every time, something
Okay.
like that. Okay.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. So we know what to do here. We know what to do here. We know what to do here. This one.
Should that roll under code organization, or are you thinking of that differently than?
Right now it's an ad hoc group. We'll have to figure out whether we need to turn it into a working group, which is across everyone, every SIG, or we need to make it like a sub-project of SIG architecture. I don't know yet. This is just to get it started at this point, because I know that we have Brian Grant has a list of issues. I have a list of issues. I'm sure all of us have a list of issues that go stale, and we keep reviving them. So this is an effort to collect all of them and see if there is anything we could do. Even if we have to move the needle just a little bit every release, we'll have a curated backlog that we can.
For something like that, I wonder if a project board might be like a good first step, just to kind of gather and see in one place. Because
Right.
like you said, there are a ton of issues, and some of them age out, and some of them are just in people's
Right.
heads, and like just getting visibility might be a good, really low cost first.
So my only concern there is, right, those issues are generally owned by the SIG that, some SIG, and that SIG has decided they're not a high enough priority to pursue. So,
not necessarily, John. For example, Brian had a thread out a couple of months ago about something that was overarching everybody. So let's take a stab at it. And if it is specific to specific SIGs, then we'll make sure that they see it and they can dispense with it, right? And if there are things that are across SIGs, then we'll try to help with that. But the point here is we should have an inventory. We don't have an inventory, and I like the project board idea. So let's start with that.
In my mind, the best candidates for this would be the types of things that there isn't a clear owner for. Like if it's something in a particular component, that's that SIG's responsibility to prioritize and work through. But if there's something like everyone agrees it's a problem and no one knows who owns it, like that.
I thought those were your problems, Jordan.
What?
I thought those were generally on you.
No.
Well, I mean,
he generally solves them. That's the thing.
You stepped up to own all the build stuff, so I just thought the rest were yours too.
So should I put your name here, Jordan? No, I won't do that to you. Derek, you have your hand raised. Sorry, I didn't notice.
I'm on mobile. I meant to unraise it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So I need somebody who can run this one, at least tag team with me to get this started. And the first deliverable would be just a project board that we can look at as part of the SIG architecture. I'm looking at Jared, Jorge. Would you be willing to get us started with the project board and start seeding the stuff?
Not sure either of them are on the call. Oh.
I think I saw one of them.
No.
Mayank, are you interested to do this? Anybody
Which one?
else on the call?
Which one are you talking about?
The technical debt research.
What do we need to do?
Basically, we need to seed we need to create a project board, then seed the project board with a list of things that that have been outstanding for a while.
Technical debt.
Sure, I can do that. I'm not sure I have permission to create boards, but I am an org member.
Okay, we will. You can ping me off after the call, and then we can go over how to do things Okay.
Okay, James, I would also love to help.
Yes. Jorge knows everything on how to do this stuff. So thanks, Jorge. So between Jorge, Mayank, and myself, let's try to get this started. Okay. Anybody who has a list of things, please drop them to, on the project board once we advertise it. And if you are not sure, just ping me and we'll talk about it. Sounds good?
Yes.
Okay. So going on to the 4 sub-projects, we already talked about this, unless anybody, any of the new people who put their name here had a question about it. Jared, did you have a question about what we do in API governance? Or Ken on code organization? Going once, going twice. Okay. Then going to the section about SIG architecture chairs. So there were 3 people who were the SIG architecture chairs for. There were 2 running the SIG architecture for a while, and then we added Matt, and then we added Derek and I, and then we went back to 3. Given what we have right now, given what we are envisioning here with these 4 new task forces, do we need more SIG architecture chairs? That's a question here. Anybody have an opinion, thoughts?
We do have 3 already, right?
Yes.
I worry that adding too many makes it difficult to speak with a unified voice.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to encourage people to try to shop around for their favorite SIG chair. No disrespect to the people who put their names on the list.
Right.
I agree. I think 3 is actually a fine number. It gives us enough coverage if people are out, and as long as they're all actually able to devote time and do it, I think it's great. I just put my name down there because people said we wanted more help, so I volunteered. But I don't actually think we need more than 3 effective chairs.
Okay, sounds good. So Valerie, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Did you have a thought here?
I think 3 is reasonable as far as I can tell.
Okay. And if one of us want to swap out, then obviously we'll have a pool ready-made here, right? So that's good to know that there's people who are willing to pitch in here.
So I like the idea that this doc takes of taking some of the responsibilities of the chairs and charting them out, like the meeting topics and things like that, and enlisting help to get people involved in some of these really focused aspects. I think that's great.
I want to stress too, from a community perspective, that a chair is a responsibility. It's not like a status of privilege. It is a lot of work. So like if people show up to help do the work, they'll naturally be promoted to those chairs just by their efforts. So by all means, if you are interested in becoming a chair, please show up and help. We always could use the people who do the chop the wood and carry the water.
So
Right.
just remind us who exactly are the chairs at the moment?
At the moment, it's myself, Derek, and John.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. John Bellameric.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Pronunciation.
John, did we make this into a sub-project yet? Is it completely?
Well, the discussion on, I was going to send an email later today.
Yeah.
The discussion, people weren't sure whether we should be a sub-project or not. So it's not officially a sub-project yet. The issue is whether there's ongoing work or whether this is implement this cap and move on. And in which case we don't really need a sub-project, because the intent is that the reviews aren't like an active pool of reviewers specialized in that. It's that we build the tooling and kind of enable reviews in different sections by different people. So it's still not clear. I think that if we wanted, I think there are other related things that we could put under this, not just production readiness reviews, but like the KEP that David put out on the beta policy, the definition of alpha, beta, GA criteria. I mean, I think there are other kind of issues we could tackle potentially under the same group, but at least the group that met Tuesday wasn't thrilled about, I wasn't, enthusiastic about a new sub-project particularly. I don't think anybody's against it either. So maybe I can ask the same question to this group if people see that as a sufficient body of ongoing work that we should just make it a sub-project and give it that charter. I personally think that there's enough there, but I don't like that extra process and overhead if others don't agree.
I definitely feel there is a need to do what we did last time, and if we get started with something and show value to a couple of KEPs, then we will. So we'll have to make sure that we are adding value rather than just gatekeeping, right? And the second one is trying to have enough people with the background and the knowledge who will be able to help with the full flow of when there are many more KEPs in the mix, right? Coming in. That's my thought there. Okay, so there's a couple of questions from Jared. One was the CLI and KEPs. We'll talk to him when he's here. He's not here right now. And the other one was of the code generation subproject, and Nikita already answered. We are at the bottom of the hour, 2:31. So let's let me just give one chance to anybody who hasn't spoken up already. Wojtek, Mayank, Arturo, Mike. Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Going once, going twice. Okay.
No,
yes.
I'll just, this is Arturo, sorry. I'll just join because first I need to be pulled from the people who knows how to do things, but I will attend, and then I'll get into the work, but I need some guidance from the other people. That's why I joined to the all issues to the place where it's not maybe too much pressure and making decisions, because I need to get involved little by little. But thank you very much.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, similarly, this is Mike. I'm here to make sure that anything happens that goes down towards SIG node stuff that I pick it up.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Anybody else wants to say something? Once and twice. Okay, and now let me pass the baton to David. David, do you want to introduce the topic and talk about it?
Sure. So I'm sure many people are aware that we have lots of beta APIs, and that sometimes it takes a long time to go from beta to GA. And this KEP is about making sure that during that time frame, we didn't just, I don't want to say forget about a feature, but decide that something else is more important. And I have some personal experience writing several features. I did things like the CRD API, which just plain took a long time to get to GA. But I also was responsible for some of the pieces in the CSR API, which has languished. Similarly, the admission webhook API took a long time, thanks to Jordan Liggett for pushing that one over the line, because we had left it in beta for almost 2 years. And as we do that, it has impacts for us trying to promote something to GA. and looking at like, well, what behavior changes can we actually make? Now that we know what we want to do, can we actually make the changes? And it has impacts for the consumers. And I'm also a consumer downstream where I'm using it, and I get used to using it, and I forget that the thing is beta. And so it makes my transition to GA more painful because I have built core pieces of products around beta features. And I am both the guy responsible for that, and then the guy who's going to take it to GA, make the changes, and have to then like feel the pain on the other side. And I thought about what I could do to help encourage us to focus our effort on getting something to GA, and to also make it clear to consumers, including myself, that, yo, this thing's beta. And beta has a meaning, and it means that you should be real careful about building product around this. And how I can balance those two things. So this proposal is that we bound the number of releases that an API can live in a particular beta version. And you know, the conversation on this thread and in the Google group has led to a realization that we should scope this down to just our REST API, because that's very easy to assess and look at without argument. You came out as a beta version. And we can measure you, and to then use that to force a deprecation. So the idea would be, the initial proposal was for 2 releases, but I think based on comments, we're going to go with 3, and I will be updating the KEP to reflect 3 releases, where you are in beta, you're on by default, and you get feedback. And you can take that feedback and improve your current beta version for a while, but if you aren't going to make GA, you introduce a new beta. So you introduce a new beta, you deprecate the previous beta. Remember, deprecation does not mean removed. So your consumers, they'll get a notification that they're using a deprecated beta API. There's an alternative, but they will get to continue using that API. And then you'll continue to roll over until you achieve GA. And when you achieve GA, you also deprecate your beta. I think we've had cases where we didn't deprecate the beta when we went GA. And we want to make sure basically that we have a rolling clock on the features that we have.
So is the goal here to force users to acknowledge that they're using a beta by the sort of constant deprecation?
Yes, that is one goal. One goal was to make sure users are aware.
So I have a question. You said they'll get a notification that they're using a deprecated API. When did we build that?
Oh, release notes. So release notes scan for deprecated. Oh, you don't? Okay.
People don't check those.
Okay. I can say I don't generally read all the release notes, but grep for deprecated is a thing that I do.
I think if we're going to do something like this, we need to do better. We've talked for quite a long time. I mean, I remember this pre 1.0 talking about adding a notes field to the return type on most API calls, where you could get a note back that says, hey, yo, just FYI, this is a deprecated API, and kubectl or other tools would be able to push that out. So if I said kubectl create something, it would stare me a message that says, this is a deprecated API.
Okay. I remember that Brendan Burns poll from like 1.4.
We've talked about it off and on for a long time. It was never important enough to do.
So I guess I look at it and say, using the APIs, it makes sense to at least, I check for new ones, I check for deprecated ones, basically the diff. But if other people don't, maybe we can think of a different way to communicate it. But yes, the point of having the different, having a version constantly come out and say deprecated is so that people do get used to the idea, like beta, it has a time span.
So I would like, if that's really the goal, and actually I agree with the goal of making it more obvious that users are using beta. I think that's at the heart of a lot of our problems. Like Ingress, I'll take the blame for this one, has been beta for 3 years. And people don't really realize it. except some do. So you get some high value customers who say, well, I don't want to use betas. I think we can look for other ways to put the beta-ness in people's face.
I think that one PEP to me isn't real. That's a secondary. Sorry, Quentin. That's a secondary goal of this. From my point of view, this is about the developers and giving them an incentive. Essentially, right now there's zero cost to leaving something in beta forever, and there is cost to taking something to GA.
But there were real concerns raised on the email thread of like, are we going to punish our users for our contributors' non-responsiveness?
Yes.
I will say that I suspect that perhaps my priorities would better reflect trying to take something to GA if there was actually concrete action required to keep it in beta.
That's my belief too, and I think I said this on the KEP discussion that I believe our developers in general are acting in good faith, and that the reason they're not taking to GA is because there's zero cost to leaving it in beta, and there's other priorities. But if there's actually a cost to leaving it in beta, then why not just make it GA instead if it's good enough as it is? I mean, if there's changes needed, then I don't know. Either way, it's just changing the incentive slightly.
I wonder if the core of the tension isn't, going into beta is a guarantee from the project that this thing is going to go GA, right? So that's part of the beta meaning. And yet we don't actually, I'm not sure who specifically signs up to make sure that that happens in a concrete period of time. So people volunteer to build a beta thing and they promise and put their hand on some other book and say, we're going to make this GA. But we have no way of really enforcing that. So we can't go backwards. We can't deprecate something that we said we're going to take to GA, and we don't have necessarily the staffing to make it go to GA, so we kind of get stuck.
We actually can deprecate things from beta. The timeline is longer. It ends up being about a year. Three releases or 12 months, I think.
Have we ever done it?
We have not. The one that I'm aware of whose future is most in question is pod security policy, which is in beta. It was in beta before we defined what beta meant, so there's wiggle room there, but it's in beta and its future is unclear. Most of the other beta things still have plans to progress to GA. They're just languishing.
Right, but just maybe my understanding is out of date. Beta originally meant this thing is not like in full use, in wide enough use yet that we know that it's ready for production use, but we have every intention of taking it to GA, and you should start using it and developing it, not in production yet, but you can assume that you will be able to build production systems on it in the future. Is that wrong or is that accurate?
I think that's a good characterization. The deprecation policy talks about not removing support for a feature categorically once it reaches beta. We shouldn't promote things to beta unless we have an idea of how we're going to get them to GA and intend to.
Yeah. All right, Tim has had his hand up for a long time, and then Tim, and then.
The story I wanted to say here is, like, if there's a clock, then there is stuff that we can tell our management chain saying, okay, if we don't do, there's a clock going on, and if we, that is our justification for putting some resources and getting some help on a particular feature and progressing it or letting it, go down the chute, right? And if there is no clock, then what I get feedback is like, oh, it's the same problem we had with the cloud providers too. Oh, it's in tree, nobody's going to take it out. If there's a date or a deadline when people will take it out, then you tell me, I will go figure out what to do, right? So it's the same story. So if there's a clock, then there is justification that we can take up the management chain to say, okay, there is things that we need to do here. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So Tim, you go next.
So I think it's a good idea to force people to understand their GA plans before we approve a beta. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that point, right? I also think we can't pretend to force our army of contributors to do anything, right? We can tell them that we're going to rip out their API, but we better mean it. And the deprecation rules do allow it, even though I think, Quentin, your characterization is the sort of idealized form. That is the intended form. We can't actually force people, and we better be realistic about this. And maybe we're generous with exceptions, but in order to get an exception or an extension of your beta timeline, you come before this group or some other group and plead your case, thereby putting some barrier to just leaving it in perma-beta. But I keep coming back to this idea that users are not sufficiently incented to not rely on betas. Ingress is a great example. Like, everybody uses it and it's in beta, so we just have to acknowledge that it isn't actually in beta, it's actually in GA. I would love to explore other ideas to make things more obviously beta. I've been putting a lot of thought into that over the last year or two. I've talked with Daniel Smith a little bit about this. I've talked with Brian a little bit about this, but I've never really written down the ideas. If there's people who, like David, I would love to throw some ideas at you and see, as with your API machinery hat on, like what sticks.
I would like to be able to tell users that something is at risk. I have an interest in that. I am trying to find ways to incentivize developers. I think Dims and John both face similar challenges to what I do in terms of overall interest in not the developer parties, and I do think that actually removing an API is actually fairly easy on an API machinery level. We can just kill it in the server. It's not friendly, but it is possible. And I see Quentin.
I think Valerie. Okay, Valerie actually had her hand up quite a while back. I don't know if she wanted to make a comment.
I'll catch up later.
Most of what I had to say has been kind of said already.
Okay. Quentin then.
I just actually wanted to respond to Tim. It's pity he stepped out, but I totally agree that what I sketched out is kind of idealistic, and we don't actually have a way to make people do things. So one alternative would be to modify the beta kind of meaning to say the project intends to take this thing to GA, but if you want to use it as a user and you want it to go to GA, you may actually need to fund getting it to GA. You would have the support of the project, but the work needs to be done, and the project does not actually have employees per se. And so therefore, that's kind of the message to users. It'll either get deprecated in a year and go away, or you can help get it to GA. And that may kind of address the thing more practically.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that. But I think Derek raised his hand, and now Valerie's got her hand up too. So
yeah, just I don't think it's crisply stated in the CAP, but I think David and I were talking about this briefly before the call. When we're describing this, in my mind, this is covering APIs that are under the purview of KK itself. And I don't know if others in this discussion are thinking more broadly than just that core project. And if people feel differently, if they think this criteria should just fall to all sub-projects, or just are we discussing here with the perspective that this covers the KubeCube repo content primarily?
I think that's the initial expectation, just from the perspective of giving other, any core built-in types, but it has to be thought about in the context of CRDs and the kind of evolution of moving people away from core types. I think that's
Well, I can safely say that I would never try to move someone in XKates.io or dictate their deprecation policy or their life cycle in any way.
right. So just, I guess it's by API group, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's what we were just trying to clarify is this is Kates.io REST API resources, not those that are outside of that grouping, correct?
Yeah.
I would imagine it would form a kind of a precedent that other projects might follow as well. And I think there's value in that. I'm not sure that users necessarily see as clear a distinction between those two groups as we do. They just want to use this stuff and understand, when it's going to go away or whether it's going to go away.
I mean, I think it would certainly need to apply to any API that's ever going to be subject to conformance. So anything that's going to be GA and built in and non-optional. And so if that means it's got to be in Kates.io anyway, then that makes sense. I think we can't, like what David said, can't dictate to other people anything on that outside of our API group. But
one of the things that I like about this cap is that it lets us put a lifetime on a beta API when it's first announced. Like, as opposed to our current method of operating where we promote something to beta and write a bunch of documentation and demos and examples, and like we're wanting feedback, so we're trying to entice people to use it. And there's we don't even know at this point how long they're going to be able to use this thing for. And so we give people all these examples and encourage them, use it, give us feedback. And then like at some point later in a release note, like a year later maybe, there's a note that says, oh, we promoted to GA or whatever. And so now this thing that we encouraged you to use for a year with an unbounded time frame is now deprecated. And we've like built this habit in people using Cube APIs that beta basically means use it, and I guess I'll stop using it when it stops working. Whereas if the time frame or the expires on date started to become just part of a beta, like here's a beta API, we'd love to get feedback. It's going to be around for 2 or 3 releases, then be deprecated, be around for another 2 or 3 releases. Like if every time you're reading the documentation for a beta API, you're seeing like this will be around for the next year, like that changes how you think about using it. And if it was me, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to build a product that I'm going to need to support for 5 years on top of this beta API. Like I'll use it and give you feedback, but I'm not going to like ship it in a client and expect it to work forever. I think Tim's point about like thinking of more ways to surface this and make this visible is good. We should come up with as many as we can. I like the idea of kind of active, like in your face. If you're using a beta API, you're going to get, or a deprecated API, you're going to get warnings and things like something. I like that as well. But if at the same time we're asking for feedback, we can make it clear, like, please give us feedback, please use this. We'd like to promote it to GA. Here's the lifetime of this beta API. I think that would help.
yeah, I think that makes sense. I think Tim St. Clair's had his hand up for a while here.
I actually like it, but I think what's kind of missing here is it seems like we're solutioning something where we don't have the full state space of it because we kind of made it up as we went along. But having a workflow or a document that outlines this is the life cycle of an API from soup to nuts, like this is what it means to go to alpha, this is what it means to go to beta, and here are the policies around that, that would help to illuminate the community about like what it means to actually be a beta API and what are the guarantees and what are the life cycle events that occur with it. Because right now we don't really have that, and we have a bunch of APIs that either in beta or even GA that graduated surreptitiously along the way because one person or another pushed the feature through.
Yeah, I think that a couple things. We're almost out of time here, so we should try to wrap up. But 5 minutes, 6 minutes left. I think that the discussion of alpha, beta, GA, and the life cycle of feature and the and the criteria for advancement from one to the other and the policies around deprecation. We have a lot of that stuff, but it's probably time to revisit them. I raised an issue a while back on in the community repo, I believe, around that. So I think I wanted to continue that discussion with that same group, the production readiness group, in a sense, because I see that as at least adjacent. I think the other point here that keeps coming up is that the differentiation between how we notify or communicate with users that this is a beta API and what the expectation should be around that, and how we encourage the developers to move it forward. In my opinion, like I said, this CAP is about the latter with a little bit of the former, and that we need a separate CAP around the ideas of making it more in your face for the user. Some of the things I know that have been discussed are the warnings, but also requiring, say, a special flag, a special header to be used in order to even be able to see the beta APIs. Things like that are possibilities. I guess from my point of view, we probably should keep these two things separate and work on a separate CAP for the user side of it, and allow this one to go forward as it is.
Sounds good to me.
Valerie?
I want to kind of re-echo the point that Tim Hawken brought up around making sure that we have ways to surface this to users. Like, one thing that we could do is, if people aren't ready to move a feature, rather than axing it, at least bump the version so that people have to recompile their stuff, or critically make sure that we can surface something to like a kubectl user, because so many of like our common denominators are people who use kubectl locally. They have kubectl in Jenkins, and they are totally oblivious to whatever APIs they have up until the thing breaks.
I think that's what John was suggesting we could do separately. I think Jordan did raise some good ways to make it obvious as people try to learn how to use an API. Because we have a fixed policy and you know when you ship it, your doc for your new API can actually say, this will be deprecated no later than give the release number. It will be removed no later than give the release number. So that as you learn to use it, you see it right there. Because most of our APIs, if we're being honest, you have to look up help for.
Yeah, I think that would help for the API integrations, but I worry about people who are just slamming stuff through kubectl and don't see the API itself.
Yeah, I'm in favor of multiple efforts to like document it better and announce it better, and as you use it, like tell you.
Yeah, communication in depth.
Yeah. There are other reasons I want the side channel warning mechanism as well. Look at some of the things we have around like validation problems where early APIs allowed data in that won't actually work, but we have trouble validating it differently in a compatible way. But we could like warn you, hey, you're creating a pod that it's not going to work. Like you requested a millibyte of memory. It's not going to work. We could tell you things like that in a warning.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was against that when Brendan first opened the poll, and I see you linked in a edition.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was against it. Simply never carried it through.
Yeah.
Okay, we are out of time for today. Thanks a lot, everyone. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you all.